Hello and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode is that egregious film known as Bewitched. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a season topic, we cover 6 films that fit a C for classic, an I for indie, an N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, and A for atypical. Who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and if I don't like a part of this episode, don't worry, I'll just rewind like 15 minutes, and I won't cut it out, but we'll just have it in there. Because, why not? That makes total sense to do.
Oh, hello. I am Bryan, and man, I need to talk about Will Ferrell in this movie, man, because what's going on here?
We'll discuss. That'll be the main topic, I think, of discussion throughout all of this. Ryan, we're not alone here. We have a guest with us here. We have a guest who is actually a professional comedian, someone who actually is paid to be funny to some extent. I'm sure wondrous, massive amounts of money, clearly, and especially the modern comedy landscape. And she may be a witch. We're not sure. We're very curious, especially about the rules of what a witch would be, and hopefully she can explain that, because this movie doesn't really do that. It is Sierra Layko. Sierra, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I make tens of dollars doing comedy, so
So much.
yeah.
But welcome. So I invited you on because obviously you do have at least a more professional sense of being funny than either of us do. And I figured you would be an interesting fit for our SNL Vehicle season, which is we're in the middle of here.
hmm
So I'm curious, as a funny person, what is your relationship to SNL? Was it an influence? Was it like a big thing for you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, it still is like the pinnacle of, what got me into comedy and just like what I've always strived for. I grew up on it a bit. I can't say like I watched it every single weekend. I definitely do have like memories of like staying up late and, you know, trying to watch it. But then I really got into it when I was a teenager, and just rewatching like all the older episodes. And so yeah, it's always been a big part of my life, and like being a writer on that show is like my biggest dream. I was very honored that you guys asked me to do like an SNL driven episode.
And I'm sure this won't affect any way like your dream at all. I'm sure Lauren will never listen to this. If he does, please, Lauren, listen. Sure, why not? But yeah, so I'm curious then. What was your cast? Because people have that kind of thing, right? Where it's like, oh, this was my cast, like this particular era. Like when you think like watching SNL, particularly as a teenager, what was like your sort of like era that you just loved watching?
The one that was airing when I was like a kid, like I just turned 24, so I I grew up with like as a kid, like Kristen Wiig, Bill Hader, Andy Samberg, all of them were on. And those are I mean, I've seen every episode from that era. Like if I had to estimate like the actual years, I've seen every episode from I want to say like 2005 to like 2020, and then I've kind of fallen off a little bit recently. Um, and then of course I've seen like things from before that. So like I love like the Will Ferrell cast, which was just like a few years earlier.
Well, I guess we should bring up. Obviously, you mentioned Farrell. He's the big subject du jour for this particular episode because we're covering Bewitched as our
hmm
E for egregious pick. Our every season we do a bad movie, and this is the one that our patrons actually ended up picking. Our patrons, patreon.com/cinema cinema number 2 letter. They picked in a poll and ended up with Bewitched here, and we wanted to spotlight a Will Ferrell episode because it feels like definitely Brian. You've hinted at this that like Ferrell is kind of like the most all-encompassing. Even as someone like yourself, Brian, you didn't watch SNL that much. you were very much aware of Will Ferrell as like a comedic icon of like particularly that like new millennium era.
Yeah, I've said this before, but just to reiterate here, like I did not really grow up watching SNL. It just wasn't a thing in our household. I didn't really grow up watching a lot of American TV, so it wasn't a big thing. But I grew up in America and I went to public school, and so I was aware of a lot of the SNL cast members, and Ferrell I think remains when I think back to when I was a kid and sort of being around people who loved like those types of comedies, like Ferrell is what I think of when I think of SNL. He like represents a lot of the comedic sensibilities when I was growing up in the 2000s, and just a lot of this era of comedy, I think, of him, right? And of course, like I think a lot of like the classic kind of stuff like Talladega Nights or Step Brothers, right? The Adam McKay collaborations that he did are like really were just like the biggest thing at like my elementary and middle schools. We'll get into this a little bit, but I have a kind of rocky relationship with Ferrell. Like growing up with him, he was like everywhere. He was like the biggest star, and it was very weird for me because I just don't find him funny a lot of the time. But sometimes like I really vibe with what he's doing, and there's times, especially in the McKay movies, that I think he's hilarious and I kind of like get what his thing is. But as in the example we're talking about today, like this represents a lot of what I don't like about Will Ferrell, and again we'll get into it and stuff like that. But yeah, he was like just the big comedy star, right? Like I think there's other ones that around this time that part of the Anchorman cast as well, like Steve Carell and people like that, Ben Stiller. But like Ferrell was kind of maybe one of the most famous kind of comedians of while I was growing up. So he kind of like transcended SNL for me in that sense. But yeah, that was kind of my thing with Ferrell, I guess. But yeah, what about you, Thomas? Like, what is your kind of relationship to Ferrell around this time, or like, did you watch when he was on, or yeah, kind of?
Well, he was on from SNL from '95 to 2002, so I wasn't quite as in. I'm more
Okay,
in the
so
Sierra camp of like I like the era that I really loved is like the Bill Hader, Andy Samberg, Jason Sudeikis, the Lonely Island era. Yeah, Ferrell I wasn't really as watching as much like in that time, but I think my thing with Ferrell is like he was so ubiquitous. I agree with you. He's like such a massive comedy star with like I still remember, I'm the older one here. I remember seeing Anchorman in the theater and feeling like things had changed. Like there was a pre-Anchorman and a post-Anchorman. Truly, in terms of just like theatrical big comedy. And I think also, more importantly, with Will Ferrell, just the memification of like all of his fucking movies. There was like a certain subsect of people where it's like, obviously, I quoted Will Ferrell stuff all the time, a lot of people did, but there was a certain subsect of people where like their only comedic instinct is to quote Will Ferrell movies. And that
Sure.
person is not someone who, like, I really wanted to hang around, especially with, like, my biggest hot take about Ferrell, honestly, is, like, I really like Anchorman, but I mostly think he's not my favorite in terms of, like, being a lead comedy actor. Like, I often prefer Ferrell as, like, a spice in a movie, like Zoolander, as, like, Mugatu, I think is, like, perfect amount of Ferrell to me in the movie. Or even something as recently as there was the movie Quiz Lady, that starred Awkwafina and Sandra Oh, where he has like a key supporting role in it, and I think he's like wonderful in that movie, especially because he doesn't yell at all. He actually plays it like very calm, and in like a really interesting way. With in that movie, he plays like a game show host who's like means a lot to Awkwafina's character. Her whole drive is to get on his game show, and he's like very sweet and sincere, just reacting off of weird people, including Jason Schwartzman, who is also in this movie. Like only times I really loved him as a lead are like Anchorman or Elf. And I think Elf is just kind of like an undeniable. Like, there's a reason that movie's become so big around Christmas and stuff like that. But I'm not as big into like Talladega Nights, or especially the hottest take I have amongst like anybody from like my general age group from like high school in particular. I really don't like Step Brothers that much. I rewatched it multiple times. I rewatched it earlier today. I don't think that movie's all that funny. I think it's just kind of feels like a line-o-rama like Judd Apatow thing at like feature length, in a way that I just think is exhausting and a bit obnoxious. And I love, like, John C. Reilly. I I think John C. Reilly has a
Yeah.
much more consistent comedic presence. Yeah, I think I prefer Farrell in more of a supporting kind of role. But Sierra, what about your relationship with Farrell?
It's weird because I've always like I can't even say I'm like really a super fan of his. Like I definitely do like him and I understand why he is so as popular as he is. But I also always feel like this like calling to defend him for some reason. Like I know a lot, I've met a lot of people where they're like, oh, he's not that funny and like and for some reason I'm like, but guys, like he no he is. And I'm like, I don't even really have a reason to like defend him. But I don't know, because it's been a while since I watched Step Brothers. I just realized because Thomas, you liked my review of Anchorman 2 on Letterboxd. I genuinely
Right.
don't have m- any recollection of watching that movie. When
That
you
makes
like that,
sense.
I was like, what? Because I know I haven't seen Anchorman 1. So I was like, when did I watch the second one? And apparently I did because it was on my Letterboxd.
I mean, Anchorman 2 does feel like a collective hallucination of a movie, really.
Yeah.
Like, I remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember being with other people who saw it, but if I asked them any details about it, having rewatched it earlier today as well, I get no one remembering it. The most interesting thing about that movie is that, like, it's really Adam McKay at the exact middle point between the Farrell comedies and being a serious satire guy. Because like right after that, he does like
Yeah.
fucking Big Short and goes down that path that I'm not really a fan of. And you can that movie is all about like, oh, we'll have Will Ferrell shtick, but also this is about how the news was corrupted by corporate entities owning the news. Like it's you can't do that in the movie where he fucking like serenades a shark. Adam, you can't fucking do that here. So he just moved on to try and kind of do that with like fucking like the Big Short and other bullshit like that. And that's also interesting because like him and McKay were so tight, and I feel like him
Hmm.
splitting off from McKay ever since then, around the time of like I think the last production they did together was probably like well, I think it's actually Succession, which is the weird thing that like Will Ferrell has like
Yeah.
2 Emmys because he
Yeah.
produced Succession, which is so fucking weird.
I always
But
forget that. Yeah.
yeah, and you see his name in the credits every episode. And you're like, that's not fucking true. How involved has he been with this show since like the pilot? I doubt it all.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm more familiar with him as like on SNL than I am like a lot of his movies. Like, of course, I've seen like Elf, and I haven't seen Talladega Nights actually. I mean, I've seen like bits and pieces. I feel that's another thing about him. I feel like he's one of those actors where I've seen bits and pieces of like all of his movies, like if they were
Yeah.
just on cable, but I there's only a few of them that I actually sat and watched.
I mean, I feel like he like is one of these like movie stars, kind of like Adam Sandler, where like while I was growing up, you would put on like Comedy Central in the middle of the day or whatever, and it would be like, hey, you want to watch Anchorman? And you just watch part of Anchorman, and yeah, like these movies were just always on, when you were just browsing through cable, and I think that kind of helps with the kind of like ubiquitous quality of like making it feel like Farrell is literally everywhere. Like anytime you turn on the TV, he is there. His relationship to Adam McKay is very interesting because like even though like Thomas, you don't like those movies, like I think the thing with Farrell for me is when he is well deployed and well utilized by someone, he is incredibly funny, and I think like Talladega Nights is maybe my favorite example of that. I think that movie is like a masterpiece. I just adore that movie so much, and I think part of it is that like McKay kind of knows how to use him a little bit, and I think it's kind of the same with Jon Favreau or Ben Stiller with like Elf and Zoolander. Like when a good director is utilizing him, he is generally pretty good. Now, in this film, he is also working with a very good director, and it doesn't work, and that's very fascinating, and we can get into that and stuff. But yeah, I just find him really fascinating in how he's like also just become very weird in the past few years. Of course, he's in Barbie, which he is actually like incredible in. Like I love his performance in Barbie, and has kind of tried to stay doing the SNL thing by doing like movies like Eurovision, which go to Netflix, but like it's still kind of a feral vehicle. Or what was the one that just came out this year with
Oh,
with
Reese
Reese
Witherspoon, the
Witherspoon?
cordially invited. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is another thing is that like he is kind of a victim of like obviously in like the modern comedy landscape and like in terms of theatrical releases, not a lot. And I feel like Anchorman 2 is really like the last example of that, where that movie made like over $100 million and was like a success, even though we all memory hold it and we're never gonna remember it.
Same with
But
Zoolander too.
well, I mean, Zoolander 2 is more of that's less like a memory hole and more like we put that in a box and we put a padlock on the box and then we like threw it into the ocean.
Yeah.
And it's just like going to like we're never talking about that.
Yeah, that movie is
Similarly,
awful.
I think the last theatrical released one that he did was the Holmes and Watson with John C. Reilly, which is also like dire. That's another one like in the box right next to Zoolander 2. And I feel like that's the thing is that like after like Anchorman, like it's been over 10 years since like there was a big theatrically released like Will Ferrell movie that anyone saw. And like you've mentioned, Brian, ever since the pandemic, like Eurovision or that fucking Spirited movie, or even like Will and Harper, which is a great little documentary that came out on Netflix, is still just like he's definitely relegated to kind of like, well, I guess I can't make movies that make massive amounts of money in theaters, so I'll do that. Or there was also
Yeah, an
the
Apple
weird
TV
like
show.
right the Apple TV show, or the weird Lifetime movie that he did with Kristen Wiig, which was like 100% sincere, like no jokes movie called A Deadly Adoption. And it's like there aren't any jokes in it. Just the joke is that Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig are in a 100% serious Lifetime movie. Yeah, he feels definitely kind of like a guy who's like kind of lost in the weeds of like either doing that or he at least had like sort of a second life with like doing a lot of internet stuff, like particularly the Funny or Die, which him and McKay were like very responsible for. I did rewatch recently the two videos that they did with like Pearl McKay, his daughter. I don't know if you guys remember this, the landlord thing, where it was
Oh,
like
yeah, featured in Boyhood. That's why I remember
yes,
that clip
a
for some reason.
definitive cultural marker. I can confirm that is a very definitive cultural marker of like him with that kid just going back and forth. That video was fucking everywhere. That was like a massive,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
especially at a time where like YouTube was at its infancy. That was like a massive fucking thing. And yeah, it's just weird that like Will Ferrell feels kind of like woven into the cultural landscape. Like I was on a trip with my family recently. My sister brought up fucking Catalina wine mixer. That's just like ingrained into fucking culture now. Just like fucking bits from Step Brothers and shit. So he's very much ingrained, but it feels like he is at the same time kind of lost. But let's go to an earlier time when he was very lost, but weirdly at the peak of his success. Let's talk about Bewitched.
Just when his career hit an all-time low, movie star Jack Wyatt is getting one last shot.
It's Bewitched. We're redoing it.
A couple of big names are available for Samantha.
I want an unknown in the lead. The nose. I mean...
Now,
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
after weeks of searching,
Don't look, but Jack Wyatt is staring at you.
he's found the perfect witch.
I need you. Just come and show everyone what you look like when you
What?
wiggle your nose. Marry me. Be my TV wife. Say yes.
Yes.
Yes!
But she can never let him know
But you are a witch.
I know, but I'm not gonna be one anymore.
just how perfect she really is.
I am through with just snapping my fingers and getting my way.
No breakfast after 11?
My absolutely last thing. He's idiotic, and yet I find him completely charming.
Don't do this. You'll get this close, and when he finds out about
If he loves me, he won't care. There's something I need to tell you. I'm a witch.
Bewitched.
How does this work? Am I gonna get web feet or grow horns? Huh? Am I gonna get pregnant? Because I cannot get pregnant right now.
So Bewitched came out on June 24th, 2005 from director Nora Ephron, and she co-wrote this with her sister, Helia Ephron, based on the classic sitcom, which I'm going to take a stab here and assume that neither of you have really a history with the show Bewitched from the 1960s.
No, not. I mean, I'd heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I had heard of it, and this show gives me a kind of vague estimation of what the show is like, but even like barely. So yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have like a huge amount of history with it. This is one of many shows that I was aware of because firmly dating myself once again. There was a point where Nickelodeon would turn into Nick at Night and they would air like actual old sitcoms like Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie, shit like that. It's one of many shows where I'm aware of because I watched like maybe half an episode on Nick at Night after I was like, oh, my cartoons are done. I don't know what else I'm going to do when I was a kid. And I watched a couple episodes as well as kind of like prep for this, and it's like, it's a pretty simple premise that you figure would be like fine for a movie of like a couple meet, turns out the lady's a witch, he doesn't find out until their wedding night, and now he has to like deal with like, oh, the in-laws are here, but they're like wizards or witches and shit. Simple enough. Fine premise for a movie if you were to do it as a movie. Ephron decided not to do the simple way and do a very convoluted adaptation that's so bizarre. I'm curious, Sierra, did you have any history with this movie prior to us asking you to come on for this one?
No, I had been aware of it and I've been wanting to watch it. So this was like a good excuse to finally sit down and attempt it. And yeah.
And Bryan, I assume also you had not seen the film prior to us doing this.
No, I had heard of it and I knew Nora Ephron made this, and that the pairing of Will Ferrell and Nicole Kidman like raised eyebrows, but I never got interested enough to watch it. But then I like looked at this cast and you have like Shirley MacLaine and Michael Caine, Jason Schwartzman, Kristen Chenoweth, and I'm like, what is this movie? How would this like, and especially just hearing that it was based on that 60s show, but takes this kind of meta, sort of self-reflexive kind of thing with it is kind of interesting. But yeah, I didn't really know a lot of it about it going into it. And weirdly enough, I hadn't really seen a Nora Ephron movie before this either. I had seen obviously When Harry Met Sally, which she wrote, which is one of the great films of all time. But yeah, very strange for her to do as well, kind of knowing like what she was typically known for, and this kind of has a lot of hallmarks of that. But like you said, Thomas, it's a very strange movie. So yeah.
We should talk about Ephron a bit. Obviously, like she was very famous for, like you mentioned, When Harry Met Sally kind of like catapulted her into like the rom-com, particularly like screenwriter and director, because after that she would write and direct like Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, stuff like that. But the weird thing about Ephron is like she was like a journalist for like the New Yorker that was a bit more like witty, pithy, and also she kept trying to make, at the same time she was doing all these like big rom-coms, like weird dark comedies, like Lucky Numbers, the movie with John Travolta and Lisa Kudrow, or Mixed Nuts, stuff like that, where they're like very dark comedies about like suicide and depression and all these other things. And it's such a weird contrast where it's like those movies like never really worked. Having seen like all of her movies, like those, especially the dark comedy ones, just felt like they really landed with a thud a lot of the time. She wrote a couple of good ones, like My Blue Heaven, which is like a mobster movie with Steve Martin and Rick Moranis. It's funny. It's a shame that like she kind of got pigeonholed into like the rom-com thing. But this movie weirdly kind of feels like she's trying to, serve both masters, and that like, oh, I want to make the scathing Hollywood satire, but also the like kind of cute fantasy rom-com. And I'll rip the Band-Aid off and say I don't think it fucking works at all. I think this movie's a disaster. I think it's incredibly baffling on every level. But I guess, Sierra, do you have any history with like Ephron or like that kind of like rom-com kind of era that she was very like crucial to?
Not too much. I mean, I'd seen When Harry Met Sally, and I honestly think that's the only movie of hers that I've seen. I mean, I definitely know about like her influence on that era and just like what she did for rom-coms. But yeah, it's very unfortunate that this is my second movie that I've seen of hers. Because now it's like, I don't know if I'm ever going to trust her again.
Yeah, and this is like her penultimate movie, because after this is Julie and Julia, which I think is like her, especially of her directorial works, I think is a masterpiece. I fucking love Julie and Julia. I think that movie's great.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think This one, it definitely just feels like there was a weird development process, because they had tried to make a Bewitched movie apparently for a while. Because another thing with like Bewitched like being a movie is like this is part of the weird trend from like the mid 90s through about like the mid 2000s of like let's adapt like 60s 70s era television, particularly sitcoms, into movies, where you had like the Beverly Hillbillies or like the Brady Bunch movie, which I think is a fun movie, where like that movie basically just takes the basic idea of like, hey, let's take these characters from this kitschy, dumb 70s era sitcom and put them in 1995, where it's just like they leave their home, their sitcom home, and they go into like 90s era like grunge bullshit. And I think that movie's fun for that, as opposed to like a lot of these other movies kind of try and do that and it doesn't work nearly as well. And then Bewitched feels like it's a weird mutation where like by the time of it eventually comes out, it feels like pretty out of date, and it feels just like a weird, bizarre mismatch, especially when like you hear about the production history. There was going to be one in like the 90s that Penny Marshall, who's the producer credit on this, was going to do, that would have starred Meryl Streep as Samantha, and would have had Robin Williams as Uncle Arthur, and the big joke would be they would cast both Jerry Seinfeld and Billy Crystal as the Darren character, because with the lore of Bewitched, like midway through that show, they recast Darren, the husband character, and everyone didn't give a shit. That's a reference at one point by Will Ferrell. And it would have been like, oh, Jerry Seinfeld and Billy Crystal would have alternated scenes as Darren.
Oh, that's a really good bit.
That's a good bit.
That's
Yes.
a great bit.
And apparently it would have been just like a straightforward adaptation, which is probably what should have fucking done, instead of this movie where like they're casting a reboot of Bewitched in a world where Nicole Kidman is an actual witch who does have like relatives that match sometimes with the Bewitched lore, and sometimes they're not her relatives. It's so fucking weird. Like I'm sure the both of you were very perplexed as like people who didn't really know anything about the fucking show at all.
Yeah, I actually watched it with my mom because like I had mentioned I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna watch this movie." And she's like, "Oh, I used to love the show Bewitched." So I was like, "Okay, you're gonna enjoy this a lot more than me, I think, because I'm not gonna know what's happening." And she actually did. Like, I think she saw it as being stupid, definitely, but because I think it was like nostalgic for her a little bit. Because even like when Steve Carell comes in towards the end as Uncle Arthur, she's like, "Oh my God, he's really good at that." And I was like, "I don't know what's happening." So I'm glad you're enjoying this.
Yeah, it's figuring out what this movie is about kind of as you're watching it is a very weird experience, because you are kind of figuring out like, wait, so they're making a remake of the show, but she's a real wit. Oh, that's what this movie is. It's very weird. It's kind of interesting because of that kind of meta thing that the Ephrons, I guess, her and her sister are both doing with this movie. Like, it's kind of interesting on paper in a way to, have this kind of meta, like, oh, it's a movie about a remake of the show. Like, it does feel more like almost like 10 to 20 years too early, like we are really kind of now inundated in like, remakes and IP and bringing stuff back, and not just bringing it back and like you're saying, Thomas, doing like just a straightforward version of it, but now, I mean, like I thought a lot of Barbie while I was watching this movie, like kind of subversion of what they're doing or trying to do. And it's very weird because I think Barbie is doing a lot of the stuff that this movie's kind of trying to do. There's a lot of problems with this movie. It just does feel like it is doing way too much with the plot. I think it needs to be way simpler. And there's times when I think this movie could be way simpler. But like you said, Thomas, like it wants to do both things. Nora Ephron wants to do the like, straight up rom-com, which is it has a lot of the same tropes, right? Like it has the meet cute, Nicole Kidman has like her circle of girls, like Kristen Chenoweth, that she hangs out with and kind of like talks to. And it has like a lot of these traditional rom-com elements, but it also wants to be this, like commentary on Hollywood and commentary on female stars in Hollywood and commentary on the nature of remakes and just all of this stuff. And like, it gets close to, I think, saying something interesting about, like, some of those ideas, but, like, again, it's trying to just be a fun, cozy kind of rom-com, and I think it, like, it's not completely unsuccessful, I would say. Like, there's elements of this movie, and Nora Ephron's a good enough director that, like, it's watchable, you know? But it's not watchable in the way that something like, you know, I just watched Sleepless in Seattle for the first time, and, like, that movie has a similarly, like, strange plot with like, very weird tonal, like, changes throughout, kind of like this movie. And the thing with that movie, though, is you have Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, like, two of, like, the biggest movie stars in the world. And, like, a thing I find so fascinating about that movie is it's shot by Sven Nykvist, who is, like, the cinematographer for Ingmar Bergman and, you know, shot The Sacrifice, Andrei Tarkovsky's last movie. And so it looks incredible. You know, it looks unbelievable. And this movie, you know, looks fine, but yeah, this is such a strange movie in so many different ways. And I think, like, you know, I do kind of think, though, Nicole Kidman's really good in this movie. I will say that much. I don't know how you guys feel about this. I'm curious to get your opinion on this. But I think she's kind of, like, locked into this and knows exactly kind of what she's doing. And it was kind of the only part of the movie I could latch on to and be like, okay, I think she knows what kind of movie she's in. She's balancing this really well. And it kind of keeps the movie somewhat afloat for me. But yeah, I don't know. How do you guys feel about, like, Nicole Kidman in this movie at all?
No, I definitely agree. I feel like she was the only redeemable part of the entire. Well, I don't know. I also just love Kristen Chenoweth, but besides her as well. Yeah, Nicole Kidman, I feel like every time she was on screen, it was watchable, whereas then when Will Ferrell came on, I was like, oh my God, because I've never seen somebody so miscast in a role that
Yeah.
it was just so painful at times. But yeah, Nicole Kidman was great in it.
I think the bigger thing, like, with Nicole Kidman, I agree that I think she kind of understands what a movie that this movie is going for. But I think the bigger problem is that, like, you mentioned Barbie earlier, Bryan, and Barbie has, like, the kind of genius of, like, that script with Barbie is that, like, it just lays out, like, the whole dynamics of, like, this is Barbie land. It's kind of in the, you know, on Earth, but whatever, it's some different place. It's fine, don't worry about it. And Barbies all act like this, and they have this idea of the world, so that when she ends up in the real world, it means something, as opposed to, like, I don't know what the fuck is up with, like, witches in this world. And, like, it seems dumb for me to, like, be concerned about, like, the rules and all this other shit in a comedy movie. But I think the problem is, like, when you're not laughing as much in a comedy, you start asking questions, and I think oftentimes, like, if you have a decent setup like Barbie did, for, like, vague rules, not even, like, massive lore. I don't need fucking massive lore about, like, witches going to, like, I don't know, Hogwarts or some bullshit in this movie. I just need something kind of, like, simple as to, like, what is her understanding of the world? Because, like, at the opening bit, she, like, does this whole thing where she, like, has, like, a for sale sign show up at, like, a house out front, and she has, like, she manipulates the realtor basically in order to get this house. And it's like, okay, she understands that, and she understands, like, money, but also she doesn't understand, like, certain things, like, oh, there are actors who act, and that's, like, a thing that people do. It's so weird, just, like, what are the parameters of this? Is she, like, someone who's been living amongst us, or a complete, like, new, fresh in the world, has no concept of it? Like, pick a lane. I don't know what the fuck the movie's, like, going for. So I feel like Kidman has that idea. It's just that the movie doesn't convey, like, what that idea is necessarily. But I do agree. I think she's doing the best. I think particularly, like, the funniest moments in the movie are some of the stuff where, like, she gets, like, grasp on stuff, like, the bit where she's, like, looking at Will Ferrell on the TV, and she's, like, talking, I think, with Chenoweth on the phone. She's like, oh, he's a dick? What does that have to do with him being so obnoxious? Oh. Okay, like, shit like that. That's funny. But it also doesn't have, like, much context to, like, I guess she doesn't know the idea that people would call someone a dick who's being, like, a smug piece of shit. So, like, I don't... What are we dealing with here? Who is this person?
It's
Yeah.
so weird because, like, yeah, the setup for this movie is like a weird, like, almost like Kiki's Delivery Service kind of thing, where like she's leaving home to like go to the real world to be like a normal person. But yeah, we have no conception of like what is her life like before this movie. Where do they live? Again, like kind of like you, like I don't need like these kind of concrete answers to be like logically sound or anything, but we don't really get any sense of like how did she grow up? Has she never seen a movie before? Like there's the kind of idea I guess that like Michael Caine, who is her father in this movie, who's also I think pretty good in this, he's against her being on Bewitched because it's like I guess like offensive to it's like bad representation or something. But like that's all we kind of get of like what her perception of the world is. We don't really get a lot of that. And to go with my kind of awkward Barbie comparison, like that movie, yeah, it does set up like this is the Barbie land, and then she goes into the real world. But this movie is just all the real world stuff, and there's like bits in here that I find pretty funny. I agree, like that bit is kind of funny where she asks what a dick is, or like I really like her sort of big speech when she kind of realizes what's going on and that Farrell has tricked her, and she's like ranting to Kristen Chenoweth and like her aunt, and like that's a really great scene where again like Nicole Kidman is just like bringing so much energy and really like shows that like yeah, she's one of the fucking best actresses of like of our lifetime. Like she can just do anything, right? Like she can do this like slapsticky kind of stuff, which again is kind of interesting that like this movie is kind of veering a little bit or wants to veer into like a kind of classical slapstick comedy type of thing. And then she can do the kind of big like speeches where she has to like get angry and stuff, but it doesn't feel fully realized, I think. And it's kind of a problem when, again, this movie is so much about like her relationship to Farrell. And I mean, we'll get to like Farrell's thing where he's like a down on his luck actor and he's like an asshole to everyone and stuff, but
The
like
worst person ever that's ever lived.
yeah, actually no, I like it's because when I'm watching this movie I was like thinking as the relationship is kind of developing like, oh, this is going to be the classic rom-com thing of she works on the show with him, they build up this chemistry, and because she doesn't know him she's kind of open to his bullshit. And then, he changes and he becomes a kinder person who, like, shows compassion and love to others and then like, they fall in love and whatever. It's kind of doing that, but it takes a while to get to that point. And even then, it isn't a full kind of redemption arc for Farrell. He doesn't have that kind of, like, moment of realization of, like, oh, I've been an asshole to everyone until, like, the very very end of the movie. And even then it's not as fully realized. Like I said, like it just doesn't have that kind of clean kind of rom-com narrative that like I don't want to say like I necessarily want that, but if the alternative is whatever this is doing where like she puts a spell on him and it's like that whole thing is just insane and very weird. I don't know.
Well, Sierra, you were kind of talking about this, the whole like Farrell miscasting. Go into that.
I actually read a Letterboxd review before I watched it, and someone said something about him being very miscasted in it. So I was like, okay, let's. So I kind of had that idea going into it, and then I, very quickly picked up on that, and I was like, thank God I saw that review because I feel like if I had it, I would have thought I was like losing my mind because like. Why are we acting like Will Ferrell was at one point like some huge heartthrob? Like, I don't know, like, not that I don't want to like say like he's uglier because he's not ugly, but he's not like typical, like, conventionally attractive movie star. And like, that's very much what it was like trying to do in the beginning. I don't know, I guess I've just never seen him play an asshole quite like this. I feel like every other asshole he's ever played was more like dumb and just like not at all what he was in this movie. But then like Nicole Kidman's Isabel's character would say stuff in it where she'd be like, "Oh, he's like pathetic and stuff." And like, yes, he was pathetic, but not in the way that she was like getting at, if that makes sense. Like she was like, he's hopeless and all this stuff. I don't know. He was almost giving like a Ben Affleck type where he just that's not who Will Ferrell is. So it just didn't
Right.
feel like he matched what the role was whatsoever.
The classic Will Ferrell thing is more of like, oh, he's completely oblivious to how, like, in
Uh-huh.
theory, mean he would be. Because, like, in Anchorman, that's like the classic thing where it's like, oh, he is like Ron Burgundy, sexist asshole, but the whole thing is that like he just has no concept that like he can be like a nice person about this. Because like this is the world that we live in. I'm Ron Burgundy. Fuck you, San Diego. All that shit. Like that works only because Ferrell was like just oblivious enough to like make it kind of endearing, which is like the bigger asset and stuff like, you know, like the Talladega Nights, or even like, by the way, my preferred of the Adam McKay collaborations besides Anchorman is like the other guys, where like he is like
Yeah.
a much more like sweet, genuine person, but he's just like completely socially awkward and has no idea about how to like interact with like asshole cop types like Mark Wahlberg in that movie. And here, I agree with you. Like he's trying to like be kind of like a Ben Affleck-y star. Especially, there's the weird thing that also I think firmly dates this movie in 2005. One of many things, where he's failed at the movies, so now he's going to TV, and that's considered like a tail between your legs kind of thing. Very funny now when everyone is like, no, please get me on a TV show. Fuck movies. I don't care anymore. Get me on some streaming fucking show.
Give me an
Doesn't
Apple TV
matter.
show.
Right, exactly. And like him in this movie, he is so like incredibly obnoxious. And it's like I don't like, you don't have like the Ben Affleck kind of chunk. It's like Ben Affleck, the what I think works about him in movies is like, oh, he can be such an obnoxious douchey asshole, but it's like, but that smile, that Ben Affleck charm comes in, you're like, oh, don't worry about it. Kind of like that's kind of like what like Gone Girl is playing.
Yeah,
on.
I was gonna say,
It makes that
yeah.
like sinister in a really interesting way, as opposed to like with this movie, like I think a big fault is that like they make him so unlikable to the degree that like he just has no like friend group. Like his only quote unquote friend, the closest thing he has to one is like Schwartzman as his agent, who is an
Yeah.
asshole, but like in the more charming way. Like I think he has some of the funnier lines too, like the bit where Farrell comes back after he's like going on a bender or whatever, and he tries to like tip the cop. It's like, how much do I tip you? It's like, no, you don't do that. Well, like that's like that smarmy kind of like talent agent shittiness like Schwartzman nails, as opposed to like Farrell is supposed to be like a romantic lead, but he's constantly like conniving to get more screen time. He wants to like downplay Samantha on the Bewitched show. The show was about the witch character, but it's like, no, let's make it about the husband, who is supposed to be just like the guy who reacts off like the fucking crazy situations of the witch. That's the whole deal. But he wants to make it all about him, and it's kind of like playing on Kidman's naivete in a way where like he's too worldly about like the industry to make any of that shit, like that quote unquote pathetic thing that you were talking about, Sierra, work. Because he's like gaming the system the whole time. He's such a piece of shit. And I don't want Nicole Kidman to get with him. Just like, lady, you're a witch who could have like any man on earth. Any man possible. And this guy is like the worst guy.
He says it at the end of the movie. He's like, he's like, yeah, you could have had anyone, but you chose me. And I'm like, yeah, she could have had anyone. What the fuck? What is this movie? Like, it's like a thing I think also is like, and you guys have both said this, but like, Farrell is not a romantic lead. Like, not at all.
No.
Like, that is not his thing. Like, you know, if you look at like a lot of like Elf, I like that movie, but when it gets to him and Zooey Deschanel, I become like kind of uninterested in that movie.
And
then,
all
like,
the creepy implications of that as well with that fucking movie.
Exactly.
The fact they get together is so fucking weird.
yeah, and like Farrell's thing to me though is it's a lot of what you guys are talking about. Of he is very buffoonish and very big, and like he is a cartoon character, and there's something quite funny about, like, I agree with you, he's not ugly, but he's kind of funny looking, you know, and he uses that, you know, like there's something about him where he is both kind of conventionally like handsome in like a very like American kind of way, and he's tall and, you know, whatever, and yet, you know, he's kind of funny, right? His hair looks funny, and he can make funny faces. His voice can go really like crazy, And I think that's when I like Ferrell the most is when he is in like big cartoonish, when he's Ricky Bobby, like when he is Anchorman, like it makes more sense for him to be an asshole and like those kinds of things where he is supposed to be this kind of arrogant, cartoonish person. In this, he's not really coming off as cartoonish. He's just coming off as like an asshole. And it's the really big thing when I was watching this where I was like, oh, but he's an asshole at first, but again, we're going to go through the whole redemption arc and they're going to fall in love and that's going to make him a better person or whatever, And yeah, the movie doesn't have that because he wants to like trick her and like is constantly just trying to get one over. And when we think he's become a better person, we see that he's not a better person at all. And like, there's a few moments in here I find Ferrell funny in a few moments. Like I like when he's getting the test results or like the screening results or whatever. Mm-hmm. And like, why am I Darren? They recast Darren and no one noticed. And he has like this breakdown that is like kind of funny and is kind of like, what I like about Ferrell a little bit, that kind of like exasperated kind of thing. But then there's moments here like my least favorite part of the movie maybe is their like dinner scene, like where they're outside at night and he starts like singing to her like this song that he wrote. It's so bad. I like him when he kind of goes big, but then he does two things. One is that he commits to whatever he's doing way too much, and two is he goes like way too big and really like goes with it. And again, that scene is a perfect example of he's that song goes on for a while and he goes really loud with it, and then he like asks Nicole Kidman to sing and she is not into it, and it's very awkward. And it's just part of the thing with him. And like I said, like there's a reason he doesn't do a lot of romantic movies like this necessarily, right? Like in Talladega Nights he has a wife, but it's really about him and John C. Reilly and Sacha Baron Cohen.
But then he does get together with Amy Adams at the end of that movie, the most perplexing thing.
Oh, yes.
That fucking movie. Like
yeah.
Him and Amy Adams end up an item. And then, like, there's also, I think the best example of that for me is, like, probably Anchorman, where it's him and Christina Applegate, because she's, like, actually inherently, like, funny character and plays off him pretty well, as opposed to, like, the having, like, him and Kidman just, like, there's also just, like, no fucking chemistry. It's like oil and water. Yeah. It just doesn't fucking work at all together.
If this movie were exactly the same as it is, but if you have a different actor in Will Ferrell's part, this movie is probably pretty good. Like, there's a lot of problems with the script. There's a lot of problems with, like, again, we'll talk about the weird plot line where she puts a spell on him and it's like, that's weird. But, like, I don't know, especially when you're watching a rom-com. Again, like I mentioned Sleepless in Seattle, like, for that movie, which I had heard about this for, like, years, like, Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks do not interact for most of that movie. And yet, there is something about watching the two of them, even though they're separate, that is kind of interesting. And, like, there's kind of a magneticism to both of them, and that just isn't here. Like, I also saw a similar Letterboxd review that said this would be better if like someone like John Hamm was in this role, and that's like a perfect example of the kind of person you want. Or like a Ben Affleck, of like someone who can play asshole, who can be like arrogant and smug and whatever, but who again has that kind of charm where you're like, oh you, what a stinker you are, John Hamm or whoever. Like, it's. But Ferrell, like, he doesn't have that. He's not cute enough, He, like, I would never describe him as cute. And you need someone who is kind of cute and adorable to be in this role. And he's like a down on his luck actor, but that's played more maliciously than it is sad. And I think it really needs to be like sadder, right? Because like you said, like Nicole Kidman is kind of saying like, oh, he's pathetic, he's hopeless. But he comes off very arrogant and very smug. And so I think, again, it needs to be this kind of, like, sad guy who is, like, I don't know, they play him too much as, like, he's just kind of mean to everyone. And he did, like, that isn't what this character, I think, needed to be.
Well, I'm curious, Sierra, you mentioned that, like, you thought he was so miscast. Do you have, like, someone who you would think would work better in that role to work off of Kidman?
I can't think of like a specific person who had the because like John Hamm, like that's great, but he wasn't really in Hollywood just yet.
Right.
I honestly I feel like literally anybody else. But like, that's so mean. I don't know. I don't want to get too ahead of like everything that we want to talk about, but like, like Jimmy Fallon, like that's I think someone like him would have worked so much better. I don't think he's like the greatest actor in the world or something, but like I think he was more viewed as like a more like a heartthrob sort of like in the comedy world back in the day. Whereas yeah, I don't Will Ferrell just doesn't have that whatsoever. And I can't even imagine like how they even chose him for this.
Yeah, I think even like, around the same time you have somebody like a Sandler kind of like making a
Yeah.
big deal of like all this. We'll be talking about Sandler next week in more detail, but I feel like even like he would work a bit better. And I think would still be able to do some of like the Will Ferrell isms that are here, like the kind of screen, like the thing you were making a reference to, Ryan, the whole like freak out. Like that's something that I think could work in theory, especially if you make it more about like, oh, he's like more of a comedic star who's like waning down. I think even if you had Will Ferrell and you had that more be the thing, it's basically Will Ferrell himself is like getting like lower end like for some reason, even though it's weird because this came out like right after Anchorman, when in theory he's at his height. But this is like the weird year too where like Will Ferrell does Kicking and Screaming, which is the soccer movie, the first sports movie they tried to do. And then also he's in The Producers, the like adaptation of the musical that like infamously like bombs and is disastrous. And like he kind of bounces back the next year with Talladega Nights. It is just like it's a perplexing point in his career, and to like put him in this particular movie, it's so odd. And I think it's a shame because I like a lot of the stuff around like Kidman and Farrell, like the other supporting cast. We mentioned like Kristen Chenoweth, and there's also I believe Heather Burns, who plays like the production assistant lady who's around like Kidman all the time. They become kind of like a little girl group. Like I wish that like there was more of that. Because that feels like Nora Ephron, like at her peak, like she knows exactly how to handle stuff like that. But we have to get waylaid by stuff like I referenced at the top of the show, but the fucking bit where like I think it's right after the whole dick thing that he like she sees him on TV and is like, oh, I'm gonna use a spell to make him kinder, and like then it backfires because like he ends up being obsessed with her. And there's a solid 15-minute chunk that I think leads all the way through, like the scene you were talking about, Brian, where like they go to the little dinner, like on the Hollywood Hills or whatever. And then the movie is like, no, wait, like this isn't a real connection because he's too obsessed with me because of magic. So I'm gonna rewind literally the fucking movie.
She does a funny games.
She does a funny games 15 minutes back, and we just do like the version of that movie, but like, where he's like himself again. And it's like, why did we even do this?
Yeah.
What is the point of this?
That's kind of a funny bit on paper, to be like, this actually, never mind, rewind the movie. But in this movie, it really feels like we're wasting time. Where it's like, well, then why did I watch the last, 10 to 15 minutes of this movie? And this movie is 102 minutes, hour 42. It feels way longer. You cut that out of the movie, boom, you're at 90 minutes. That's like the perfect length for this kind of thing. And yeah, it feels unnecessary because of the weird kind of thing this movie has to do of balancing, it's a rom-com where you know that they're going to end up together at the end. But also it's about magic and witches and all this stuff. I think that's also kind of the thing with this movie is that apart from the slight use of magic, it's a very grounded movie. And I think that's also a thing that Farrell doesn't do good in, right? The other kind of movie where he has a sort of partner like this is Eurovision, but they're literally Swedish cartoon character, they're playing Swedish Chef in that movie, so it's very goofy. And this is very grounded, and yet the thing where he finds out that she's magic and then the movie just keeps going, I find that really frustrating as well. It's one of my
that happens 80 minutes into this hour 42-minute movie is fucking insane. The basic premise of the fucking show of he finds out she's a witch happens a full movie runtime into the movie.
Yeah, and you expect that to be the moment of this is the rom-com thing that Nora Ephron's really good at, of the reveal, I mean, like, that scene in When Harry Met Sally is like one of the greatest like, scenes in all of cinema history, where they reveal, like, Billy Crystal's like, I love that you get cold at 70 degrees or whatever. Like, that's the moment where I should be like kind of back into this, because I'm very susceptible to that kind of stuff in rom-coms. And it's not. They have the moment where they separate and they don't talk to each other, which is so frustrating. Which is such a frustrating thing to happen, again, towards the end of this movie, but just in general, of like, it feels like there's a very easy solution to it, but the movie is kind of delaying the gratification that you want from a movie like this, and it just makes it so much more frustrating.
Did you feel any chemistry at all between the two of them, Sierra? Did you feel any of that throughout any of this movie?
No, I feel like Nicole Kidman was giving it the best she could
Yeah.
to really like try and get something there. But I don't know, it's just like his character was just so unlikable, and he just didn't really he also just wasn't like romantic at all. Like, even in rom-coms where, like, yeah, the lead is an asshole, he still has like redeeming qualities where it's like, oh, he's like actually romantic. But like with him, it was like I can't think of really one thing that was like actually romantic that didn't happen, like when he was like under the hex or whatever. Or then if something romantic did happen, it was just like straight up annoying. So no, I didn't, not at all. I did not feel any chemistry between the two of them.
There's the other thing of like, is Ferrell at all funny in this movie? We've said that Kidman has a few funny bits. Do you find any of the Ferrell like comedic juice at all in this movie?
There were like a couple parts where I was like, okay, I can see kind of why he was chosen for this. Like, that one scene, like when they're filming, like I think it was like a dinner scene, and it was like with his ex, and he's like under, the spell that she put on him, and he was just, like not in control of what he was saying. Like, that was definitely, you need some comedic sensibility for that, and to be able to do like voices and impressions. So I was like, okay, this is somewhat redeeming. I don't know if I really laughed like legitimately at any of his parts.
Yeah, I think that scene in particular like really highlights like Nora Ephron trying to do like the Will Ferrell shit, like write it, just like really falls flat because it just feels like they're from two like alien planets that just like in terms of comedy. Because like Nora Ephron usually writes like very fun like patter between people, versus like her having to do like those kind of sequences where it's like he's going through like a bunch of different takes where it's like, oh, I'm like he has to say like the line about like, oh, not without, that's my dog and I want him back or whatever, and he keeps like he says it in Spanish, he does all this other stuff like that. In theory should be like classic Will Ferrell sketch stuff. Like even on SNL he would do that a lot. Like Sierra, you can agree that like that was kind of like his like forte on that show. It's just like being able to like rattle off stuff or even like really commit, like Bryan was saying, to like whatever bit he was doing in a sketch. And it just feels like when you put it in like this setting, it just like falls so flat. And it just feels like someone trying to recreate the Ferrell juice. And it's like, no, that comes way more naturally. That's why those Adam McKay movies are like improvised. Is so he can like make up bullshit that like works.
It's an interesting point though, I think, of like the kind of divide that we have here between like Ferrell represents like this new 2000s style comedy, right? Like him and Adam McKay and like all those guys. And Nora Ephron kind of represents that like early start of the modern rom-com, right? Of course, When Harry Met Sally and Sleepless in Seattle and stuff like that. And there's overlap there for sure, right? But like they are very different kinds of movies. They're very different like the Ferrell thing is a lot more loud and crass and big. And a lot of like those, like When Harry Met Sally and stuff, is like human dynamic and human interaction. And like I said this earlier, but like I just don't see Ferrell doing that. Ferrell is not at his best when he's playing a person. I think there's a reason why, like, apart from that Apple TV show, which I guess is like a bit more serious, he's not really done like a dramatic thing ever necessarily, you know, like
He's done it a couple times, because there was the Stranger Than Fiction, which was the movie
Right.
where it's like, oh, he's like a character in a book or whatever that Emma Thompson's writing. And there was also this movie, Everything Must Go, which is much more of like a straight drama with like some comedy elements where like he plays a guy who's an alcoholic who like his wife locks him out of their house and like dumps all his stuff on the front lawn. And he has to like get rid of his stuff. And that's like supposed to be more of like a sincere kind of dramatic thing, but it kind of runs into the same problem that this movie does of like when you suck like all of the actual charm out of Will Ferrell, whether you're intending to try and have some of that like Will Ferrell kind of like man-child stuff in the movie like here or in the Everything Must Go movie, it just makes him more of like an aloof asshole type who
Yeah.
you don't want to fucking follow at all in a movie.
yeah. And I think going off of like what you said, Sierra, of like the non-chemistry that they have, and again, I don't want to necessarily blame Nora Ephron for this, but for this movie to work, I feel like you really need two performers who have that kind of like rat-a-tat back and forth, very quick, very zippy, very like boom 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 kind of thing, like, you know, Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan do in When Harry Met Sally. Like, you need it to be a lot quicker, and you know, you need that kind of dynamic to really like, you know, if they're not going to spend a lot of the movie together, you know, not under spells, but with each other, you need it to be very zippy. You need to have that chemistry really like in small doses, but you need it to be there, and it's just not. And I also agree with you, Sierra, like he doesn't do anything romantic in this movie, and the only like quasi maybe romantic thing he does is when he admits like I'm sorry, but like barely. You know, like he barely gets out that he's like apologizing for being an asshole, but again, it comes off as very insincere coming from this character, and so it's back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, what are we doing here? It just it doesn't work at all.
The closest thing he does to romantic when he's not under a spell is like the bit where they just sneak onto the set and like dance.
Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah,
That's supposed to be like their big romantic moment. But did you feel all lovey-dovey about that, Bryan, when they like dance together? It's like, oh, this saved everything. They're totally a couple now. Totally makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely. And like the only thing we get is like that, and then like there's that montage of them doing the show together, which it's like, okay, but that's not, you're not building up this kind of chemistry with them, and there's not a good rapport. Like, it's weird because this movie is like about doing a show, but it feels like they're doing a performance, you know, like it doesn't feel genuine, and it's just a really big problem when you like, this is supposed to be a rom-com and you want to like see it as a rom-com and you want these people to get together. Like, you know, I will also say this, like, I wish this movie, instead of focusing on Nicole Kidman and Will Ferrell, I wish it was about Shirley MacLaine's character and Michael Caine getting together, because that is a way better movie than whatever's going on here, you know?
Right, with Shirley MacLaine, who plays a woman who is like, she's an actress playing the Eudora character, the mother, and is constantly like hinting that she's a witch, but then they go back on that, and then she ends up being a witch. So it's like, so she's an actress who is a witch playing the Eudora character, but we also have like the Aunt Clara character, who's like part of that big 15-minute chunk that they erase, and then also we have like Uncle Arthur, who isn't like actually Nicole Kidman's uncle. He is the character from Bewitched, like interacting with Ferrell as a hallucination, but not a hallucination. Yeah. I think that's the thing. Is like I agree with you that like I think the chemistry between MacLaine and Caine seems a lot more fun, especially when he's like playing a playboy, kind of witch, a warlock of sorts. I think it's like funny on paper, but like it just opens up even more fucking questions about what this is.
It's true. I have a question about, you brought up like the show, and as someone who obviously did not watch any of Bewitched, and I had no idea what was going on when Steve Carell showed up, I was like, oh, I guess this is a character from the original show, whatever. I can't tell if this movie is being loving towards the original show, if it's looking back fondly on it, or if it is like trying to showcase how kind of silly and how rudimentary and kind of simple a lot of those 60s sitcoms were. Because when they're shooting a lot of the show and they're doing a lot of the same kind of bits that you would see in those like 60s sitcoms, it feels more like the movie is kind of making fun of those kind of shows rather than being this kind of like love letter and kind of like homage to the 60s sitcom, you know? And I was kind of confused of like, is the Bewitched remake supposed to be like terrible? Because it kind of is, because they're just doing a 60s sitcom but in the 2000s. And so I like, or what is this movie trying to say about Bewitched as a show and like 60s sitcom? Is like, how is it trying to represent that? Because I literally could not figure out what perspective this movie has on that stuff, you know?
I mean, I would think that it's sort of like an homage to it, but I don't think it came across as that at all. Otherwise, we wouldn't even like be having this discussion.
That's where, like, I was talking about this earlier, like the weird conflicting kind of nature of this movie, where it's like it wants to be the cynical movie about the industry, and like that would in theory being like, oh, we're doing a Bewitched remake, how dumb is this, how shitty it is to like take an old 60s sitcom and just do it again in the 2000s. But then also it wants to have like fucking fan service shit, like even like
Right.
Uncle Arthur is like a fan favorite character. He's played by Paul Lynde, who is like a very famous like comedian from like the 60s and 70s, who I was more aware of because of stuff like he was a voice in like the Charlotte's Web movie, the animated one, or he's the basis for Roger on American Dad, like that kind of voice.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right, like that kind of thing. And I like in theory the idea of like, oh, Steve Carell doing like an impression of this character. And like when I watched a couple episodes of the show, from what I saw, like he seemed like a character who would like pop up once or twice every season and be just like a sort of chaos agent who would just show up and like do like silly like witch related stuff that would kind of like mess with Darren, the husband character, and just like cause a bit of chaos. In this movie, it feels like when Steve Carell comes in, by the way, like at the climax of the movie, the whole climax is based around like Will Ferrell doing the whole like, oh, I gotta like drive to the airport kind of thing that would be like in a Meg Bryan kind of, you know, rom-com. But it's like, I have to stop Nicole Kidman from leaving because if she goes to the witch world, she'll be there for 100 years, which Steve Carell establishes. And then they completely go back on the moment. Like she shows like, what? That's ridiculous. Why would I do that? And like that joke doesn't work when we have no idea what the actual witch world is or like, what the stakes of any of this are, like at all. But when he comes in, it feels kind of like a weird desperation point of like, well, you guys like Bewitched, so here's Uncle Arthur, and we have Steve Carell, who at this point, right before 40-Year-Old Virgin, but it's after Anchorman, obviously, when he played Brick, and he was like very much like a breakout character. And also, he was one of many people who auditioned for SNL and didn't end up getting on. It was like him and also another person who's in this cast, inexplicably just not used at all. Stephen Colbert as one of the writers.
Yeah.
Perplexing. But yeah, it feels extremely desperate when they get to like Carell, considering it feels like a reshoot, quite frankly. Like it feels like they had a completely different climax, and it's like, let's spice this up with like one of the Anchorman guys. Like they could have put it on fucking David Ketchner or Paul Rudd as like a desperation point. Like, you like that? Here's more Anchorman people.
We can talk about more of the supporting cast here while we're on this, and like, yeah, it is the weird like fan service thing that, you know, bringing in Carell, who also kind of makes sense to bring him in a Will Ferrell movie because, right, like Anchorman, he was a big part of that movie, but it is like way too little too late. I don't know. It feels like if you're someone who grew up watching Bewitched and you were really interested or intrigued by this quasi remake, I guess, would that really get you? Like, would that be your like Marvel, like, you know, oh, Captain America's back like moment? Like, I don't necessarily think that would be it. And like, you know, to speak, I guess, to more of like the supporting cast here, like Colbert, you're right, like is not really given a lot to do, which I figured he maybe would, right? Because this is, I don't know, when does his show start exactly?
This same year. That's the weird thing, is that this is like right before like him, and also this is the same year The Office starts for Carell.
Oh, wow.
So this is like right when a lot of people are like on the bubble of like getting their big kind of thing. Even though he had been on the Daily Show for a while, Steen Steele and Colbert.
just not given a lot to do in this movie, unfortunately. You mentioned Jason Schwartzman earlier, who is like doing some like real fun like asshole snob, kind of stuff, which like Schwartzman is the best at. Like he just nails that kind of like vibe so well. The problem with his character is it reinforces everything we don't like about Will Ferrell's character, I think. And so it's kind of this weird thing where like, oh, Jason Schwartzman's kind of fun, but also it is like backing up a lot of the stuff that we don't like about Ferrell's character in general.
Well, I'm curious from Sierra, who stuck out to you amongst the supporting cast?
I mean, yeah, I definitely wish that Stephen Colbert was in it a little bit more, and it was kind of disappointing that, he wasn't utilized like at all. I liked when Amy Sedaris and Richard Kind had like a cameo at the end.
Right.
But I don't know, it kind of also made me feel like, oh, this movie could have been like so much more fun.
Yeah, that really pissed me off, honestly. That like, because in the show, from once again my little knowledge, like there were like nosy neighbor characters where like the wife would notice that Samantha was like doing witch stuff, and her husband wouldn't believe her. And it's like, who wouldn't want Amy Sedaris and Richard Kind throughout like the whole fucking movie as like fun like comedic relief off of that? But yeah, like they have that problem. There's also other funny people that are just like in the background, like David Alan Grier, who is very funny on like In Living Color and stuff like that. It's just like one of the various PAs that are on the set, just given like just mainly there to be exasperated. I do kind of agree that I think Michael Caine's having fun. I think the best visual gag in the whole movie is when she's going through the supermarket and needs the different like products, like the Gordon's Fisherman or the Jolly Green Giant. Like I was laughing the most at that, and I felt like Stockholm Syndrome kind of thing. Because like, well, this is kind of vaguely funny, I guess. But yeah, like him as kind of like the horn dog kind of like father, which like that also just opens up more. I'm sorry to open up more fucking questions about the logic of Bewitched, but why is he so concerned about her living amongst humans when he apparently like has sex with mortals like all the time? What's this double standard that we're dealing with, Michael Caine? What's wrong? What's the deal?
I don't even think I really thought of that. I was more upset with like the Endor character. What was the name of the person that she was?
Oh, Iris.
Yeah, Iris. Her having to like use the spells on him to like not cheat on her. I was like, oh, come on, girl. Like you can do better than this. Like it was funny, but it was just like I don't know. It didn't feel that endearing to me.
The reason I say like I wish that it was about Shirley MacLaine and Michael Caine like getting together is because like it's fucking Shirley MacLaine and Michael Caine. Like, they are two of like just amazing screen presences. I also think Shirley MacLaine is like kind of fun in this. It's kind of a nothing role a little bit, but like I like her like when she's on the show and she keeps like winking to the camera and doing like a whole like, oh, thank you kind of thing. Like I think that's pretty funny. The thing with like the Michael Caine character like specifically is like I agree with you, Thomas. Like again, the rules for the real world and the witch wizard world, whatever, are just like not defined at all, and so it makes no sense what's happening. But also like their dynamic is kind of defined, but like it's Michael Caine would just show up randomly somewhere and be like, so what's going on? What are you doing? Like their relationship is kind of weird, and the only reason I think I find it compelling is because you have Nicole Kidman and Michael Caine doing it and going off of each other, and that's like they're just incredibly gifted actors, like part of the thing I think watching this with Nicole Kidman was like, wow, she really can just do anything, like she has done so many weird movies, like, like this is the year after she did Birth, the Jonathan Glazer movie, like, and she had just done like Dogville and Moulin Rouge a few years ago, and the others, which we covered on this podcast. Like, to see her go from like something like Birth, which is like so heavy and she is like somber and her hair is very different obviously, to doing this kind of goofy kind of like very kind of screwball type of performance is very interesting. And like that's part of just what I find interesting about this movie is her and just like the fact that she did this movie in such a weird kind of time for her as well.
Well, yeah, especially the piece that you're missing is also like that right before this she also does Stepford Wives, which is kind of in a
Right,
similar
yes.
boat of like a very convoluted misfire of a reboot of like an interesting idea. And that also is like that one movie's like way more into kind of like slapsticky comedy in a way that really contrasts with like original Stepford Wives, which is a much more like dark, almost horror driven sci-fi thing about the idea of like, oh, a woman completely losing her autonomy and become a robot, and they make that into like a much more like silly Frank Oz comedy with that one, and it feels like it's a very similar boat to Bewitched of just like Kidman's game is just like a really bizarre. We're all like left out to see as to like what this is supposed to fucking be, and it's so fucking weird. But yeah, I guess I don't know. I'm curious, Bryan. We've been doing this thing recurring in this particular season where I sent you a YouTube playlist of different SNL sketches, and I sent you a few of the Ferrell's ones. Did you get a chance to watch any of those?
I did. I watched a few of them. You know, it's funny, Sierra, you were mentioning earlier how you like more know him as like being on SNL as opposed to like a lot of his movies. And seeing a few of the ones that I had watched, I definitely understand why he works kind of better on like SNL. And we talked about this a little bit with kind of like with like Kristen Wiig on our last episode, where like seeing these people in these kind of condensed, you know, just skits is very interesting, and then seeing them kind of let loose on a feature film, like that's a really interesting thing to happen. And with Farrell, I think he's really funny on those skits. Like a lot of what he does, like the kind of big, kind of manic, the like I said, like the man child thing, like really works in those skits. And like just him using his kind of like weird body language, like the more cowbell sketch is fucking hilarious. I had like I was aware of that sketch, but I had never seen it before. And like, I mean, obviously Walken is like fucking killing it. Is just the best delivery in that one. But like Farrell is so funny with just like the way his like stomach is hanging out, and he's just like I don't know. There's something I find really, really funny about him able to be a buffoon, right? And kind of be kind of silly and stupid, and he just really nails that on like these sketches. But again, like a lot of what we're talking about with Bewitched specifically is the sort of miscast nature of him. And because again, like with those the ones that you sent me, it's a lot of him doing like a character, right? Like one of the ones you sent me, which is funny, was him doing a performance on Conan as Robert Goulet.
Yes,
really, really
love
funny.
that so much. Yeah,
yeah, and like so when he is dressed up as these like big kind of characters, like again, I said this earlier, but like that's when I prefer him. Like I prefer when he is playing like Ricky Bobby or you know or whatever. Like he is a character, whereas this he is like it's kind of too close to him just being Will Ferrell, you know, which is not that good.
yeah. Sierra, speak to that, please, about like what you kind of prefer about him in like the SNL era compared to like this movie or some of the other movies that he's been in.
Um, yeah, I think just like the physical comedy is so good. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen in in his SNL audition, he does an impression of a cat, and he's just like on the floor playing with cat toys, and it's it's just you see like the physical comedy there and like why he's considered like one of the best. And yeah, I don't know, you just didn't really get that in this movie, which is, that's really you want to see Will Ferrell be goofy. And if you're not seeing that, then you don't. I mean, I'm sure some of his other movies where he's a little in a more dramatic role, I don't deny that he probably could do that, but just in this movie in particular, because he was so unlikable, it's just, it kind of took you out of like the reason people like him in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Even especially with like this movie, there's the whole a big thing with Farrell's like he's a what like 6'4". He's like really fucking tall.
Yeah.
And it's just a weird thing when you have like Kidman to contrast him. Like she's infamously like one of the taller like leading ladies out there. There's not much of like a height difference even, which could make for some kind of interesting comedy. Like even in that Cordially Invited, you have him next to Reese Witherspoon. He like towers.
Oh, that's so funny.
He's like massive. And the weird thing about that movie, like, spoilers for this newer movie, like throughout most of the movie they're rivals because the whole thing is like, oh, they book the wedding at the same time. Like one of them is trying to have like he's trying to have his daughter get married at this place, and she's trying to get her sister married at this place. And for the most of the movie, they're just total rivals who like are at each other's throats. And then they try and do the romantic, like, oh, they get together at the end of the movie, and that like just falls so fucking flat. It is like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's another like oil and water situation. It just like doesn't work. And it's a weird thing similar like with like Kidman, where it's like if you had somebody who like, I don't know, it would be funnier if say you mentioned Kristen Chenoweth. That's a funny pairing. She's so small and he's gigantic, and they're both like very silly characters. Because like even in the SNL playlist I sent you, Brian, there was also the cheerleader one with him and Sherry O'Terry, who is also like a very short SNL player, and that works wonderfully. Because like the two of them are at such different height differentials, but they're at like the same energy level playing off each other. That's like incredibly funny. Or there's also the one of my favorite Ferrell sketches is this one where he plays like an evil boss who's like trying to interview Pierce Brosnan.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right. And like in that one, there's a bit like near the end of it where like because everyone like he's like yelling at people saying horrible, awful shit, and then at the end of it, like Chris Parnell comes up and he's like the perfect contrast too for Ferrell. He's very short. And he's just like, I am so angry at you. I'm going to actually kill you. I have a trident, and I'm going to stab you, Will Ferrell. And the two of them fighting is so fucking funny. And, like, when you don't have, like, take advantage of, like, that element of Ferrell, it just feels like a wasted opportunity. I just feel like, you know, if he was ever going to do an actual dramatic turn, I feel like he has to do something like, and this might sound very odd, but, like, Vince Vaughn in Brawl in Cell Block 99. Like, Ferrell needs to play, like, a weird, intimidating psychopath person. I think that's the only way you can go with him in terms of being dramatic, because it just feels like when you have, like, this energy, like, in comedy, where he's, like, on, like, the edge and just, like, doing, like, all these, like, you know, riffing all these lines, it feels like he's a maniac, just, like, reeling at you. I think the only way where you could kind of work as a dramatic actor is, like, playing off the fact that, like, he's a towering, lumbering man who will, like, he's a wall. You can't fucking get past him.
That is a great call, and I would kind of love to see him in an S. Craig Zoller movie. Like, that would be so funny. Or, like, the thing that, like I said, I like about Ferrell, though, is when he plays, like, characters, when he is, like, fully in, like, you know, I mean, Zoolander and, like, Talladega Nights, like, he is kind of, like, fully embodying this character, Anchorman as well. And, like, I could see, like, someone doing a kind of, like, Uncut Gems style thing with him where just like completely redo his look, like make him into like this completely other character and do something that is kind of funny with him, that it's playing on his persona, play on his physicality like you said, but just kind of a more dramatic movie in a way, but still using that his comedic sensibility. Because like I agree with you, Sierra, like this movie does not use a lot of his physicality really. And like one of the bits I do kind of like that he does, which is it's just a Will Ferrell thing, is when it's after they've split up and it's like Halloween and the little girls come all dressed as like witches, and like his reaction to that, where he like opens the door and he does like the Will Ferrell, like he's just like like his face like, you know, turns like sour and is like, you guys look great. Like that is like a really funny Will Ferrell moment that like he's really good at, but there's just not a lot of that in this movie, of that like that physicality like you said. And another frustrating thing though is that you set up this kind of thing early on with Nicole Kidman's character where she can like manipulate things around the world with her like magic that is also not defined at all, but that doesn't come up in interesting ways throughout the movie. Like I was hoping that there would be really funny ways that would be implemented. Again, you could use Ferrell's physicality in that way to kind of play in that way, but that scene where he like speaks in like different languages or whatever is kind of the only thing we get of that really, and like the thing with the dog, but that's like whatever. And yeah, and I think it comes back to what you were saying, Thomas, of like Nora Ephron and Will Ferrell are just not compatible. Like those two styles of comedy just feel completely opposed to each other. And like you can't really blame either of them necessarily. It's kind of just not a great pairing, but yeah, it's a lot of what kind of like hurts this movie overall though.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're running out of steam on Bewitched, so why don't we go into let's just go into final thoughts here on Bewitched. Sierra, any final thoughts? Any like summations about your thoughts on the 2005 film Bewitched?
Huh. A letterbox review just popped into my head. I can't remember who said it. It was someone I follow, and I think the review was something along the lines of like, "Ugh, men are so annoying," and that was just the review for this movie. And I thought I feel like that kind of summed it up perfectly because it really was just about an annoying, unlikable guy and Nicole Kidman. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, I don't think. Um, but I will say I still enjoyed watching it because it felt like such a shit show at some points. Which that can be fun sometimes, but it can also be frustrating. But again, it's fun to then vent about it with people. So if you ever want to hate watch something, I guess this would be a good one.
Yeah, men are so annoying, and I'm sure you're so glad you talked for an hour and a half with a couple of annoying dudes.
Not you guys.
But anyway, fellow annoying man Bryan.
Yes, hello.
Any final thoughts? Yeah, on Bewitched?
I think a scene in this movie just popped up that we haven't talked about too much, but the scene where they're like both on set across the room from each other and they're like making like googly eyes at each other, constant like back and forth, and it goes on for like 5 minutes or something. I think that's like a perfect kind of like microcosm of what's wrong with this movie, that scene just doesn't play like at all. Their chemistry doesn't play. It's really awkward. It's really weird. This movie is a perfect example of how important casting is, right? Like getting the right person for the right role. Because like, as we've kind of said, like, I like Will Ferrell when he's utilized well, you know, like I love Talladega Nights so much. I think that movie is absolutely hilarious. I think he's really funny in it, but so much of the problems of this movie come from the fact that he was cast in it and he is just not the person for this movie. And you know, you have someone like Nora Ephron who clearly like has things she wants to say with this movie. Like there's a part of this movie with Nicole Kidman where you can tell that she's kind of doing a commentary on the way that women are treated in Hollywood, and clearly that's something that she would have experience, like, you know, talking about. And when the movie starts to gesture towards that, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. You know, the fact that that Nora Ephron in this movie has kind of like tried to kind of sneak in here some kind of, again, commentary on the entertainment industry and the way that, again, like men are so annoying and, you know, try to trick women into doing shows for some reason. Like that stuff is getting interesting, but the movie has to do so much in an hour 42 minutes. It has to do the rom-com stuff. It has to do the reveal of when she like admits to him that she is a witch, which is such a terrible scene. And it none of it really works, you know? Like I agree with you, Sierra. Like part of the fun of watching this movie is just kind of like studying it, just being like, this isn't working. Like actively while you're watching it, you're like, this is not good. This is not working. Why? What is going on here? And also I think there is an inherent coziness to these 90s, 2000s era rom-coms that I think like I don't know. It's like taking Ambien or something. It just kind of like relaxes you, just being in this kind of like cozy mood. That's kind of the best I can say about it. Yeah, I also liked Richard Kind when he showed up. I was just like, Richard Kind, this is amazing. And then the movie ends, but whatever. You mentioned, Thomas, one of like all the PAs kind of helping out. One of them is PJ Byrne, who I really love. You know, he's been popping up in a lot of stuff recently. I always love him when he shows up. Shout out to Conan. He's in this movie. We're
Oh,
recording
yeah.
this right after the
SNL writer,
Oscars.
Conan O'Brien, yes.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Same with like the James Lipton bit. I thought that was kind of fun. But yeah, this movie just doesn't work, and yet I don't know if I would discourage people from watching it, just because as we are kind of living in this era where like any show that people liked from the past is coming back as like a fucking Peacock original series or whatever. Like, this is an interesting movie in that case. Like, you know, 20 years ago, this movie was kind of trying to comment on that kind of thing. It's not very successful at it, but it's doing it. And again, just the kind of interesting thing of like this movie kind of doing a lot of the similar things that Barbie does, and yet Barbie, you know, is way more successful at it and does a lot of really funny and interesting stuff, as well as visually, right? Like, just that movie just like looks incredible and has so many visual gags, and this one doesn't. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting SNL vehicle, I think, because the least interesting part about it and the most problematic kind of element here, problematic in terms of it doesn't work, not like, you know, whatever, but like, is the SNL star, right? Is Ferrell, because like, I think Nicole Kidman is kind of cooking in this. Like, she's very funny, I think, at times, and is like kind of dialed into what this movie is, but it is just a real mess, which makes it interesting.
I mean, it definitely is. Like, Ferrell is truly like trying to fit like a square peg in a round hole kind of thing.
Right.
It's just
exactly.
like it's not computing. It doesn't work at all. And I think that it's so poisonous to the movie for me that I think it's just like such a massive disaster that I think is also partially like a big problem with it is that like we're talking about how like, oh, the one element of like, oh, they're making fun of reboots is kind of like ahead of its time, but everything else about this movie is so like of a specific era that I think even 2005 was so dated for with certain elements. Like, honestly, the funniest thing I got from this movie is the image of Nicole Kidman in a bucket hat. That happens when she first meets up with Will Ferrell. That is just like such a thing that could only happen in like 2005, that Nicole Kidman would willingly wear a fucking bucket hat. It's so absurd that like I got more of a laugh than like anything that's happening in that scene where like that's the bit where Will Ferrell like notices her and is like, oh, I'm pretending like I'm over here and like I'm not looking at you, but I'm looking at you kind of thing. That just feels like it's just so dead in the water. It feels it's a dead fish of a movie to me. That there's just like, it feels like there's so much potential in like the basic idea of like, hey, just have like a witch show up and like have a romantic relationship with a mortal, and then like, oh, shit goes haywire. And instead they go with this like incredibly convoluted idea that like does a bad job at the rom-com angle, does a bad job at the fantasy angle, does a bad job at like the showbiz behind the scenes angle, and it just feels like it's just this weird mishmash that doesn't really appease anything. I think I agree with Sierra that like it's mostly fascinating as like a why did we do all of these things, like dissecting it, which is so fun for a comedy, you know, is to like really just dissect every little nook and cranny of it because it's not making you laugh. It's just like it's a weird thing, and especially where I was also thinking about this, that like someone who was making rom-coms around this time, who I think kind of could have worked in the Ferrell role, another person who I was thinking of, Matthew McConaughey, is kind of like the exact person I think you would get, I think, to work where it's like he's like an asshole, he's roguish, but at the same time you could see him eventually like converting over to like, you know, being a nicer guy, I would argue, by like the end of this, as opposed to like a Ferrell, because he's like this like weird, you know, very tall, very like funny, weird performer on SNL who's like known for, like Bryan was mentioning, doing silly characters. There's like no emotional grounding. So like when this movie like is supposed to come to its end of like, oh, but they're together and they're having a relationship with each other and they're like living a happily ever after. It's like, that doesn't seem like a happily ever after to me. This feels like this is a relationship that will like dissolve like a fucking snail and salt kind of thing. Just like disastrous combo. It just doesn't work out nearly as well. And it's a shame, especially for like Nora Ephron and Ferrell and Kidman, a lot of talented people in here. It just it's a real bad mix of very talented people, just not computing whatsoever. But yeah, let's go into our segment Between the Lines. So on every episode, myself, Bryan, and a guest will recommend a movie that, you know, is somehow tangentially related to the movie we're talking about, or could be maybe just an alternate choice to watch instead of Bewitched, our egregious pick for the season. And Bryan, you're going first. What is your pick for Between the Lines?
Yeah, so, you know, we're in the realm of bad SNL vehicles, especially of this time, and at the beginning of Bewitched, Nicole Kidman and Michael Caine visit a Bed Bath & Beyond,
R.I.P.
which is R.I.P., which is, again, of its time. And in a little movie called Click from 2006, starring Adam Sandler, he also goes to a Bed Bath & Beyond, gets a magic remote from Christopher Walken, and he can change his life. Look, I grew up watching this movie a lot for some reason. Like we mentioned with like a lot of these Ferrell vehicles, like this movie was always on cable, like constantly, and I would just watch it because again, it was that time. Like I don't know, something's on TV, just watch it. Why not? Like there's nothing else to do. You know, we're talking a lot about like, this kind of like mixture of the rom-com and these kind of weird magical elements, and this is another perfect example of a movie that is not very good and yet is like fascinating to watch. You know, speaking of guys are so annoying, has a very like, you know, premise of like, my wife and kids so annoying, the old ball and chain here, I'll just mute them, you know, that. And it is such a strange and weird movie, and it doesn't work, and a lot of it has aged incredibly poorly, like worse than you could imagine. Specifically, I think with like David Hasselhoff as Sandler's boss, who, yikes, I'll just say that if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. This movie just has a very weird thing, spoilers, I guess, for Click, of just this incredibly emotional final act of the movie, basically, that is just kind of weirdly emotionally devastating and super existential and is incredibly weird. And I remember watching it when I was like a kid and being like, why in this ridiculous, stupid, bad movie am I kind of about to cry? You know, because that ending when he's like in the rain and is like, you know, having this kind of realization, like it like weirdly works in a way. Like I watched this movie fairly recently when I was watching a bunch of Sandler movies, and it like still kind of works even though the rest of the movie is not very good and not very funny, and Kate Beckinsale is the kind of thankless role as his wife. Yeah, it's just an incredibly weird movie that is like, again, really kind of emblematic of the SNL vehicle as I remember it when I was growing up. Like, this is also kind of the era, I think, of like when a lot of these SNL vehicles were starting to turn a little bit, and we were like, wait, Adam Sandler's making bad movies now. And that kind of leads into like a lot of when I grew up was Sandler making bad movies. And I think this is a big fulcrum point for him, and especially to come out in 2006, kind of close to Bewitched, and kind of another very strange kind of unsuccessful movie. Yeah, I don't know. Have you? I assume you guys have seen Click, or at least aware of it. I don't know. Do you guys like this movie? How does it fit into, like, I guess Sandler's larger work for you at all? And yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm curious, especially Sierra, how you feel about Sandler in general, because we're going to be talking about Sandler next week. But how do you feel about like him, especially in relation, I guess, to Click?
I think Click is another movie that I've only seen parts of, and it's been a long. I have such like a notoriously bad memory of movies that like I'll watch something and then I can't remember it. But yeah, I think like him in general, just I kind of grew up on. He was another one where his movies were always on cable.
Yeah.
You kind of couldn't escape him. But I don't know. I feel like I've grown pretty fond of him like over the past few years. Especially like after Uncut Gems was just a great movie. Of like the ones from like the early 2000s, like those movies that he did, I can't really say that I have like one in particular that I'm like, oh, I really love that one. Okay, yeah, I remember watching bedtime stories.
Yeah,
Like I have a
yeah.
very vivid memory of watching.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. I mean, I'm sure I was a child at the time, so I probably thought it was good. It probably wasn't. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I really like Adam Sandler, and but he's another one where it's like, yeah, he was kind of just part of the culture, and I would catch it
Mm-hmm.
on TV.
Yeah, I'll save my more Sandlery thoughts for next time. But in terms of Click specifically, this is a weird movie that like has become also kind of culturally ingrained in that I know so many people who talk about like you're mentioning Brian, like the ending of this movie, the kind of like emotional manipulation element of this movie, just like really like sad. People are like, oh, that movie's so good, I cry at the end of it, and it's insane because this movie is like not just like a very silly comedy, but an incredibly mean-spirited,
Yeah.
shitty, awful comedy to like, especially just anybody like Sean Astin as like the swimming coach who like gets constantly berated and they keep doing like the bit where they like pause and like pants him and shit in, like in public situations and shit, like because he becomes Kate Beckinsale, another fucking Sandler and like incredibly out of his league like women like Kate fucking Beckinsale. The two of them like end up becoming like a couple after Sandler shockingly is ostracized by his wife for being like shitty and distant because he fucking pauses the remote all the time or whatever. This movie has a really weird cast too. Like Henry Winkler is his dad, right, who ends up
Yeah.
dying, and Jonah Hill plays like the older version of his son at one point.
Yeah.
It's a really weird, like group of people. It's very odd, but yeah, I remember it just mostly being kind of like a more mean-spirited Adam Sandler movie that then tried to like really emotionally manipulate me. And I saw this movie in the theater, and I remember even at the time, just like, and I was like, a teenager at that point, but it was like the exact right moment for me to feel like offended. But like, how fucking dare you try and do this to me? Adam, like this is not your fucking forte, dude, and you're just like putting like this whole thing where it's like, oh, he's like old now, and he's like, oh, I regret not hanging out with my family, and I'm gonna go into the parking lot and it's raining, and I'm gonna like die here in the fucking parking lot, and it's like, oh, cool, this is supposed to like make me feel like this was a redemption. Like, fuck off, dude. This is so shitty. How fucking dare you? So yeah, I'm not a fan of Click. Would have been worthy as like an egregious one if we decided to do that instead of what we're doing next time.
I do want to say also, just while we're on Sandler, thank you to our Patreons for not making us watch The Cobbler, which was the other choice that was up for for the vote for the Egregious episode. So thank you for that.
Sierra, are you aware of what The Cobbler is at all?
Hold on. Wait, no, I don't
Get
know what
ready.
The Cobbler is a movie about Adam Sandler playing like a shoe cobbler, but the premise is that like he finds a pair of shoes that when he wears them, he like can transport himself into literally the shoes of the last person who wore them. That's his whole thing. Is that, like whenever he puts on different shoes, like, oh, I can become like this other person. It's made by Thomas McCarthy, who the same year put out Spotlight and won an Oscar.
Oh my God. That's so funny.
It's crazy. It's a fucking weird
Isn't
movie.
Dan Stevens in that movie?
Dan Stevens is in that movie.
Yeah.
Dustin Hoffman plays his dad. Steve Buscemi is also in it.
Yeah.
And there's a whole twist that basically involves like the reveal is that like, oh, the cobblers have been at war with the dry cleaners for decades, for like generations. And there's like a weird I'm not making any of this up. Brian has also seen this movie. This is a real fucking movie.
No, I was just looking at it on Letterboxd, and everyone I follow gave it a 1-star review.
It is very bad. Yeah. So we could be talking about that movie right now. So
that's true. We
thank you to our Patreon members.
Yes, thank you so much. But I'm going to switch gears here and bring up my recommendation for Between the Lines, which is a movie from 1999 that isn't like an SNL vehicle, but it does have a fair amount of SNL people, including Will Ferrell, in it. It's the 1999 film Dick, which stars Kirsten Dunst and Michelle Williams, very young, as two teenagers in 1972, where they're like very like, you know, poppy, like very lovable, gullible kind of teenagers who live in the Watergate building. And while they're at the Watergate building in 1972, they witness the Watergate break-in. And the whole movie is basically around like them having like had this information about like, oh, we saw somebody sneak in, I don't know who it is, while at the same time they try and get like a summer job, and their summer job is through like them end up being like, oh, like they witness Watergate. Richard Nixon notices them. It's like, hey, why don't you girls come over here to the White House, and how about you watch Checkers as like their summer job. So they're taking care of Nixon's dog while they also have this like incredibly sensitive information about a massive political scandal. And it's incredibly funny. It's from director Andrew Fleming, who had also done stuff like The Craft. But this cast is insane too, where like Nixon is played by Dan Hedaya, who's a great character actor. Wow. You've seen like a million things, and is kind of like the exact perfect person to play Richard Nixon.
I can literally, I can hear him.
You see that man, you're like, nope, that's Nixon, 100%. Well, of course, and it's ingenious casting on his part, on the part of the filmmakers. But also, Will Ferrell plays Bob Woodward next to Bruce McCullough, who's as Carl Bernstein, and he's like from like Kids in the Hall and stuff like that. And the two of them play like bickering assholes who are just like constantly trying to like find some kind of story, and they're like not at all the kind of wizened journalists from like All the President's Men. They're like bickering children who are constantly like trying to find some kind of story, and they stumble into like basically these two girls who are Deep Throat. It's so fucking ridiculous and silly. And it's kind of perfect for especially like Ferrell in like a supporting part that's not like major, but is like just sprinkled enough once again to be like an arrogant asshole. And there's a couple other SNL people in here, like Anna Gasteyer, Harry Shearer, Jim Brewer, but also even another Kids in the Hall alumni, Dave Foley. Terry Garr is also in there as one of their moms. Even Ryan Reynolds plays a small part in this movie. This is before he kind of became ubiquitously Deadpool-y. It's just kind of like a nervous neighbor guy who Dunst has to like romance in order to get like files that are needed. Like Michelle Williams is in the other room trying to get files and shit. It's a very silly, ridiculous movie that I think kind of got lost, especially in like the 1999 era. That I remember watching a lot on Comedy Central in particular. This was a movie I definitely discovered, like many an SNL vehicle, through rerunning constantly on Comedy Central. And I just think it deserves a lot more love. It's very silly, it's very funny. Dunst and Michelle Williams, shockingly, are amazing in this movie. Wonderful, and especially even at a young age, where like the two of them had been child stars, and this feels like one of their first like, oh, we're like kind of getting to like more of an adulthood status, and we're like being put in like this, you know, kind of Valley Girl-esque characters, but playing with a lot of sincerity and a lot of like joy and real, especially like they kind of grow to like be endeared to Nixon just because he's like, oh, you know, you girls are like, you know, we were responsible with Checkers and we're showing you around the White House. But the movie is them, you know, realizing that, oh, Richard Nixon is a dick. Hence the title of the movie. It's just really fun, really sweet. I don't know, have either of you seen Dick?
No, but I really want to now.
Yeah, I feel like this movie has gotten a bit of a resurgence over the past few years. I feel like there's been a lot of people talking about it. I have not seen it, even though it feels like a movie made for me because it's a movie starring two of my favorite actors of all time, baby. Like, Michelle Williams is an actor who, like, you know, can make me cry doing anything. You know, like there's like 5 movies she's in where like I cry because of something she does, and Kirsten Dunst is just one of my faves. This is the same year as Virgin Suicides, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is very interesting. Yeah, I have not seen it. I really do want to, especially just knowing that Ferrell is playing Bob Woodward is such a funny thing. And yeah, Hedaya as Nixon is great, and also Terry Garr is in this movie. Shout out to Terry Garr, and rest in peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to see this movie.
Well, Sierra, what is your recommendation for Between the Lines?
Okay, so it's another SNL vehicle. It's actually it came out the same year as Bewitched. It's called Fever Pitch, and it stars Jimmy Fallon and Drew Barrymore. Um, I chose this because it's also not an amazing movie. But I do think there's something like, and have either of you seen it?
No, I have not.
No, me
No.
neither.
It's basically the plot is that Jimmy Fallon's character is such a huge Red Sox fan that it like sabotages his relationship with Drew Barrymore. And it's so stupid, but I don't know. And it's been years since I watched it, but I remember still being very like there was something endearing about Jimmy Fallon in it. I feel like it's on the same level as Bewitched in a sense, but it was more satisfying to me than Bewitched was. But then again, like I said, I watched it years ago, so maybe if I watched it now, I would think it was just as bad, if not worse. But it's an interesting one. I also just love Drew Barrymore too, so and I thought she was, but she was also very goofy in it because it's just a goofy plot in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Barrymore in general. Not so much Fallon. I think Fallon can leave a bad taste in my mouth. I think particularly, Bryan, you were talking about the cowbell sketch, and did you notice that maybe Fallon was kind of breaking a bit during that sketch? He was very subtle about it.
I mean, he never does it. He's such a serious performer.
Very composed. Right, exactly. Yeah.
It is very weird to me, especially with what Fallon has become now as like the worst late night host, like easily. Like anytime I see a clip of like a late night show with an interesting host and I see them talking, I'm like, oh, let me watch this. I want to see and then it cuts to like Fallon and I'm like, I'm out. Because he is not a good interviewer and he's not funny. And I just, yeah. But it is very interesting that like, he's one of those people that like, I didn't really know he was on SNL. And I still am kind of like trying to wrap my mind around that. And also just the fact that he was at some point a leading man in movies is like crazy to me, I think, in a way, because of like what he has kind of become now. But having not seen this movie, it feels like so much of like this was very emblematic of like the 2000s era for like rom-coms of like Drew Barrymore, Jimmy Fallon, 2 big stars. We got to have them fall in love together, but with a baseball twist. And it's like it's in Boston. Like it seems perfectly sort of cheesy and corny in that rom-com way. I'm kind of interested in, and I'm not gonna lie, I love a baseball movie, a baseball drama, and a baseball rom-com sounds kind of weirdly up my alley. So I don't know.
Very interesting. This is a Farrelly Brothers film,
right? Yeah,
which is like very interesting because it feels like that's not quite their speed. I remember that, and I also remember the fact that this is one of the few sports things I know. But like this was filmed around the time like that the Red Sox were like having their infamous like, oh, we're finally winning somehow in the season after like 100 years literally of never winning in like the playoffs.
Yeah,
like this was like when they finally won it. And I believe, from what I remember, the whole context of the movie is that the Red Sox are doing their usual like, oh, they suck. But they were filming it like at the height of like, oh, finally, fucking finally, it's happening. Just like the weird kind of serendipity of that kind of coming out. But yeah, and the Fallon film thing is interesting because that was very short lived. Because it's pretty much like this, and right before it was Taxi, which is the
Oh,
movie
I've
with
seen
him and Queen
Taxi.
Latifah.
Yeah. Weird movie. Or weird time.
Right,
Like,
yeah. It feels like they kind of gave him like just a couple chances, and they were like, "This isn't working. We're not gonna even attempt this necessarily." So he became the late night host.
Yeah, let's give you the late night show.
Right, which to be fair, I'll say this much: he is currently, at least I think, the worst late night host. He did have a while where he could at least be slightly above Corden, but now Corden's not doing it anymore. So
Yeah.
there's at least that. But yeah, let's go ahead and just go ahead and repeat our titles for anybody in case they want to put them on their watch list somehow for any of these. Bryan?
Yeah, I had Adam Sandler's film Click from 2006, directed by some guy. I don't know. I can't remember. I closed the tab already. I'm sorry.
No, it's fucking one of those guys, like the 5 people that direct Sandler movies.
Frank Karachi. Okay, yeah, he made like The Wedding Singer.
The Frank Karachi
and,
joint, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
The Waterboy, yeah.
That's what we all know. Not Dennis Dugan is what I believe his actual name is. But and I had the 1999 film Dick, featuring Will Ferrell, amongst a few other SNL people.
Yeah, and I had Fever Pitch from 2005 by the Farrelly brothers.
Before they made serious movies like Green Book.
Yes.
They had to have their
Yeah.
fever pitch. On that note, we're going to start wrapping up here. We want to thank some people. We want to thank Burial Grid for our music for the show. Purchase music at burialgrid.com. Thanks to Michelle Kyle for our artwork. Find her at MishKyle96 over on Twitter. Thanks to our supporters on Patreon. Patreon.com/cinema2letter. Where for just $1 a month, you get access to all sorts of bonus stuff, including, we'll around this time have our some audio review stuff for, I think, Sinners is the movie we're going to be reviewing on the Patreon this month, which will be fun. And we'll have our big retrospective on the Final Destination movies, which will be fun. And you get access to stuff like that. And also, like Bryan mentioned, you get to vote for certain things we cover. Like this particular episode was chosen by our Cineast patrons. So thank you so much once again for making sure we didn't cover The Cobbler. But we have one more person to thank, and that's Sierra. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Really appreciate you being a guest. Go ahead and plug yourself. Where can people find you, if you want to be found?
Oh yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, I can be found pretty much, I think I have the same username everywhere. So Twitter, Instagram, Sierra Layko. So it's SIERRALAYKO. I post a lot of my stand-up stuff like on Instagram mostly. So yeah, thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, and definitely follow any of her stuff. I've seen some of the stand-up clips. Very funny stuff.
Thank
Need
you.
to, see you on stage for sure. But on that note, we should also say that you can find us in our rinky-dink operation at cinema2letter on the different hell sites. Whatever hell site you're on, we're probably there at cinema2letter. You can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd is at Not the Who's Tommy, and occasionally doing some writing stuff at film-cred.com.
Yeah. And you can also follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever at BRYANDRADE and the number 3. Or you can just follow me on Letterboxd at my name, where I will probably be watching some Adam Sandler movies this week, which I am very excited for.
And for more of us, please subscribe to us over on Apple Podcasts or other podcasting platforms. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, our podcast network, go ahead and listen to all the other great shows that are on the network. And you can also dig into the archives in our Podbean main feed for the last seasons of this show, and also all the old Double Edge Double Bill stuff is all there for you to peruse. And nothing else if you can't, support us on the Patreon. That's cool. Money can be tight. The free way to help us is to rate, review, or simply share the show around to give us more visibility. Make sure people can see us like Michael Caine as the Gordon's Fisherman. We need that kind of advertising, Bryan. We need Michael Caine to promote us on different things. He's retired now. We can make some extra cash off that.
Oh, that's true. We should become grocery store
mascots.
Food? Yeah, mascots.
I think you'd be a great Toucan Sam, Bryan.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful. Yes. Well, on that note, we should just tease our next episode. As we've been kind of teasing, we'll be going into Adam Sandler territory by covering Billy Madison, probably the first big Sandler vehicle of some extent. That'll be our M for Masterpiece pick for this particular season. Sierra, have you seen Billy Madison?
Yeah, it's been a very long time though.
Yeah, but we're pretty excited, especially, covering like very early Sandler, because we debated a lot about which Sandler movie we wanted to cover. It had to be done. It was written into stone that we would have to do a Sandler movie this season, and I think doing Billy Madison, I think just going back to pretty much like the origin point, at least post SNL, I think will be very interesting. Wouldn't you say, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like kind of like Sierra mentioned, like I am someone who grew up with a kind of rocky relationship to Adam Sandler, and then I have really, really warmed up to him in the past few years. And like, even though society tried to gaslight me into thinking Adam Sandler was a bad movie star, and I think he's a fascinating comedy star, and I think it'll be really, really fun to just talk about what makes him such a fascinating like comedy star and movie star and everything. So yeah.
Yes, that'll all be for next time, though. Until then, everybody, I mean, I guess we fly off on our broomsticks, even though were we established as witches before this point? I don't think it was, like, really well established, like, what our sort of witchcraft is in general. I don't know. It's a very confusing ride, but it's over. Goodbye!